Framed at 19 for a crime he didn't commit, he was left with nothing but a key to his grandfather's abandoned property. Forced to sleep in a derelict train caboose rotting in a field, he discovered something bolted under a bench, a secret that would unravel the lies that destroyed his life. And if you've ever felt like the world had written you off, stick around because this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're about to go somewhere real. The sound of the gate buzzing open was the loudest thing I'd heard in 18 months. It was a raw industrial screech that vibrated right through the concrete floor, up my legs, and into my teeth. For a year and a half, my world had been a muffled collection of sounds. The soft scuff of state-issued shoes on linoleum, the low murmur of tired conversations in the common room, the rhythmic clank of the night guard's keys on his rounds. This buzz was different. It was a sound of expulsion, of finality. I picked up the thin manila envelope that held the sum total of my worldly possessions, a driver's license that had expired 6 months ago, $17.42, and a bus voucher. The guard, a man named Miller with a face like a worn-out leather boot, didn't look at me. He just nodded toward the heavy steel door. "Good luck, kid," he said, the words as flat and gray as the walls. I didn't say anything back. Luck felt like a foreign country I'd never have the visa to visit. The air outside hit me like a physical blow. It was late October, and a damp, cold wind was slicing through the valley, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. It smelled of freedom, and it was so overwhelming it made me dizzy. I'd forgotten how big the sky was. Inside, you only ever saw it in neat, barred rectangles. Out here, it was a vast, bruised purple canvas stretching to infinity, indifferent and enormous. I pulled the thin jacket they'd given me tighter. It wasn't nearly warm enough. It never was. I walked down the long concrete path, not looking back. There was nothing to see. The facility was a low, featureless brick building that squatted on the landscape like a concrete toad, designed to be forgotten by everyone on the outside and inescapable for everyone on the inside. I reached the road. A single bus stop sign, rusted at the edges, leaned tiredly by the shoulder. And that was it. No welcome party. No family car waiting. Just me, a bus voucher, and a silence that was somehow louder than the buzzing gate. My grandfather was gone, passed away while I was inside. My mom had disappeared from my life years before that. I was officially, legally, and existentially alone. The bus arrived 10 minutes later, its headlights cutting through the growing twilight. It hissed to a stop, and the doors folded open with a sigh. The driver, a woman with kind, tired eyes, glanced at my voucher and then at my face. She saw it all, I'm sure. The institutional pallor of my skin, the way I held myself, coiled and tight, like I was still expecting a shove from behind. She didn't say a word, just nodded me on. I found a seat at the back, pressing my forehead against the cold glass of the window. The bus pulled away, and I watched the place that had stolen a year and a half of my life shrink until it was just another dim light in the darkness. I was 19 years old. I had a record for grand larceny, a charge that had been pinned on me so neatly I barely understood what was happening. One minute, I was working in my grandfather's repair shop. The next, I was being told I was part of a ring stealing and stripping classic cars. They had evidence, they said. An anonymous tip. Parts found in a shed on our property that I'd never seen before. My public defender, Ms. Albright, had been sharp and overworked. She told me they had a solid case, even if it smelled wrong. The deal was to plead to a lesser charge, do the time in a juvenile facility until my 19th birthday, and get out with a sealed record. The alternative was to fight it, go to adult court, and risk a decade in a real prison. My grandfather, sick and fading fast, had begged me to take the deal. "Just get through it, Leo," he'd whispered, his hand trembling on mine. "Survive it. I'll make it right." He died 3 months later. He never got the chance. The bus rumbled on, its interior lights flickering. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was his face, disappointed and afraid. He'd raised me. He'd taught me how to turn a wrench, how to read a schematic, how to live an honest life. And in the end, I'd brought cops and shame to his door. The weight of that guilt was heavier than any prison sentence. It was a life sentence. The bus ride was 3 hours to the city's central depot, a place I had no reason to go. I had no one to call, nowhere to stay. The $17 in my pocket wouldn't get me a motel room. Maybe just a hot meal and a coffee I could nurse for a few hours in a 24-hour diner. After that, I didn't know. The street, I guess. It was the place everyone inside said you ended up. It felt inevitable, like gravity. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, the driver was calling out the last stop. The bus was empty except for me. I gathered my envelope and walked to the front. "You got a place to go, honey?" she asked, her voice soft. I just shrugged, unable to form the word no. She reached into a paper bag by her seat and pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "Here," she said, "ham and cheese." My husband always packs me 2-inch. I took it, the lump in my throat so thick I couldn't speak. "Thanks," I finally managed to whisper. She just nodded again. "People can be good," she said, as if it were a lesson I needed to relearn. "Don't you forget it." The depot was a chaotic whirlwind of noise and light. People rushing, announcements echoing, the smell of diesel fumes and greasy food. It was too much, too fast. I felt like a deep-sea fish brought to the surface, my insides crushed by the change in pressure. I found a quiet corner and ate the sandwich. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I had one more stop I had to make. A promise. Before I disappeared, I had to see Ms. Albright one last time. Her office was a small, cluttered space in a state building downtown, a place I remembered all too well. The receptionist looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion when I gave her my name. But a few minutes later, Ms. Albright herself came out. She looked just as tired as I remembered, but her eyes were still sharp. "Leo," she said, a flicker of surprise in her expression. "I didn't expect to see you." We went into her office, a room piled high with files, each one representing a life teetering on the edge, just like mine. "I don't have much time," she said, but she didn't sound unkind. "What can I do for you?" I swallowed my pride. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've got nowhere to go. I didn't know who else to talk to." She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. She studied me for a long moment. "Your grandfather," she said. "He called me. A few times. After you were sentenced. Before he passed, my heart seized." "What did he say?" "He was worried about you. He kept saying it was his fault, that he'd messed things up. He made me promise that if you ever came to see me, I was to give you this." She rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a large, worn envelope. It had my name on it, written in my grandfather's shaky, familiar script. My breath caught. She pushed it across the desk toward me. "He also left you the property, Leo. The house, the land. It's all yours." I stared at her. "The property? It's condemned. The county was going to seize it for back taxes. They still might," she said, her tone pragmatic. "He hadn't paid in over 2 years. The debt is significant, and there's an offer on the table from a development group, Trinity Holdings. They're offering to pay off the tax lien and give you $5,000 for the deed. Frankly, it's more than the land is worth. The place is a wreck." She slid a formal-looking letter across the desk. The Trinity Holdings logo was sleek and corporate. They want to build luxury condos, apparently. My advice? Take the money, Leo. $5,000 is a fresh start. A bus ticket to somewhere warm, a deposit on an apartment. A chance to get away from all this. I picked up the envelope my grandfather had left. It felt heavy. Inside was an old-fashioned key, the kind with a round head and a long, intricate shaft. It was the key to the front door of the house I grew up in. Tucked beside it was a bus ticket to a town called Northwood, a place I hadn't seen in a decade, and a $100 bill. A note, just a few lines, was folded around the money. "Go home, Leo. The key is to the house, but don't stay there. It's not safe. Use the Caboose. Your future is there. Forgive me. Gramps the Caboose." I remembered it. A rusty red train car he'd bought at a salvage auction and had hauled onto the property when I was a kid. He used it as a workshop, a place to tinker. It was my secret fort, my castle. "The Caboose," I said out loud. Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow. "Leo, the place is falling down. The house is probably full of black mold. A train car can't be much better. Take the deal. Sign the papers. Let me help you start over, for real." I looked at the developer's offer, then at my grandfather's key. The easy way, the smart way. $5,000 felt like $1 million. It was a lifeline. But my grandfather's words echoed in my head. Your future is there. It made no sense. The future of that property was a wrecking ball and a pile of debt. I have to go there, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I have to see it for myself, she sighed, a deep, weary sound. All right, Leo, it's your choice. The offer from Trinity is good for 30 days. They've been very persistent. Call me when you get there. Let me know you're okay. She gave me her card. The bus leaves in an hour. I stood up, clutching the envelope. Thank you, Ms. Albright. For everything, I didn't do much, she said, her eyes filled with a frustration I was only just beginning to understand. The system, it is what it is. Be careful, Leo. People who want something for nothing are rarely a good sign. The bus ride to Northwood was a journey into the past. Out of the city, the landscape slowly flattened and frayed at the edges. The highways gave way to two-lane country roads. The strip malls and gas stations were replaced by dense forests of pine and oak, their leaves a riot of dying color. The towns we passed through got smaller and smaller, their main streets lined with brick buildings from another century, some with windows boarded up, others still stubbornly holding on. It was a part of the state that time and progress had largely forgotten. I remembered this trip from when I was a little boy, my face pressed to the glass of my grandfather's old pickup truck. He'd brought me here after my mom left, to this small patch of land he'd inherited from his own father. It was supposed to be our fortress, our escape from the world. For a while we had 5 acres of woods, a small, sturdy house he'd built mostly with his own hands, and the big red caboose that sat in the meadow behind the workshop. That caboose was my whole world. I'd spend hours in there, watching him work, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and oil. He'd tell me stories about the railroad, about how these cars had crisscrossed the country, carrying people to new lives. It felt like a magical place, a vessel of endless possibility. The bus let me off at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. The town of Northwood was still 2 miles down the road. There was no station, just a gravel shoulder and a signpost. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp and clean, and so quiet I could hear the rustle of leaves in the trees 100 yards away. The silence was unnerving. I started walking. The road was cracked and uneven, weeds sprouting from its fissures. The weight of my decision settled on me. This was insane. I was walking toward a condemned house and a pile of debt, having turned down the only real money I might see in my life. Every logical part of my brain was screaming that I should have taken the deal. But something in my grandfather's note, that desperate plea for forgiveness, wouldn't let me go. I had to know why. I had to understand what he meant. An hour later, as dusk was turning to true dark, I saw it. The turnoff. A dirt lane, almost completely overgrown. The old wooden sign he'd carved, Parker and Son, was barely visible, covered in vines. I pushed my way through the brush. The lane was a tunnel through the trees. And then it opened up, and I saw the house. Ms. Albright was right. It was a wreck. The porch roof had collapsed on one side, leaving it sagging like a broken jaw. Windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling in long, leprous strips. A blue tarp was nailed over a hole in the roof, flapping mournfully in the wind. It looked haunted. It looked like the physical manifestation of all the grief and failure that had consumed our family. It was no longer a home. It was a tombstone. My grandfather's note had been clear. Don't stay there. It's not safe. I didn't need to be told twice. The place felt fundamentally wrong, as if the sadness had soaked into the very timbers. I walked around the side of the house, my feet sinking into the overgrown grass. The old workshop was still standing, though its metal roof was streaked with rust. And behind it, in the middle of the meadow, was the caboose. It looked smaller than I remembered, and the vibrant red paint was now a dull, faded rust color. But it was there, solid, real, a piece of my childhood stranded in a sea of neglect. The door was stiff, but it wasn't locked. I put my shoulder into it, and it groaned open with a screech of rusty hinges. I stepped inside. The air was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from my cheap cell phone. It was exactly as I remembered it, only covered in a thick shroud of dust and cobwebs. The long wooden benches still ran along the walls. The small pot-bellied stove was in the corner. His workbench was at the far end, tools laid out neatly, as if he'd just stepped away for a moment. A fine layer of dust covered every hammer, every wrench, every screwdriver. He was a man who believed in order, even in his chaos. It was colder inside the caboose than it was outside. The metal walls seemed to suck the warmth right out of the air. This was where I was supposed to stay. This was where my future was. It felt like a cruel joke. I spent the first hour just trying to make the place habitable. I found an old broom and swept away the thickest layers of dust and grime. The floor was solid wood, and it seemed to be in decent shape. The benches were built in, part of the caboose's original structure. They were long and hard, but they were a place to sleep that wasn't the ground. I unrolled the thin blanket I'd been given at the facility. It wasn't much, but it was something. I sat down on one of the benches, the wood cold and unyielding beneath me. The $100 from my grandfather was a fortune, but it would have to be spent carefully. Food, a warmer blanket, maybe some candles. The thought of spending the night here in the pitch black was not appealing. I ran my hand along the edge of the bench. The wood was smooth from years of use. My fingers traced the grain, the nicks and scratches of a long life. And that's when I felt it. Underneath the lip of the bench, my fingers brushed against the cold, hard head of a bolt. I crouched down, shining my phone's light underneath. It wasn't just one bolt. There was a row of them. 4, to be exact. They weren't original to the caboose. They were newer, shinier, and they were holding a flat metal plate against the underside of the wooden bench seat. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was strange. This was deliberate. My grandfather was a meticulous craftsman. He didn't just add things for no reason. Everything had a purpose. I went to his workbench. The tools were all there, waiting. I found a socket wrench set, the steel cool and heavy in my hand. I picked the right size and went back to the bench. The bolts were tight, ridiculously tight. My grandfather must have used a power tool to put them in. I put all my weight into the wrench, my muscles straining. The first bolt resisted, groaned, and then, with a sharp crack, it began to turn. It took me the better part of an hour, my knuckles raw and my arms aching, but I got all 4 of them off. The metal plate, which I now saw was the lid of a shallow, custom-built metal box, was still held in place by rust and grime. I had to pry it loose with a long screwdriver. It came away with a sucking sound, revealing a dark, hollow space built into the bench itself. My phone's light cut through the darkness, and I saw it. The space was packed full, not with tools, not with memories. It was packed with bundles of cash, dozens of them, each one wrapped tightly with a rubber band. They were mostly hundreds and fifties. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. I reached in and pulled out one bundle. It was more money than I had ever held in my life. I pulled out another and another. They filled my lap, spilling onto the floor. It had to be tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. But that wasn't all. At the very bottom of the hidden compartment, there was a large, sealed plastic freezer bag. Inside it was a thick stack of letters, all in my grandfather's handwriting and a small black audio recorder. The top letter was addressed to me. Leo, it said, if you were reading this, it means I'm gone and you've found your way home. I'm so sorry. I have to tell you the truth. It's the only thing I have left to give you. I sat there on the floor of the cold, dark caboose, surrounded by a fortune I couldn't comprehend, when I began to read. The world outside, with its looming tax bills and predatory developers, simply ceased to exist. There was only the rustling of paper, the familiar slant of my grandfather's handwriting, and a story that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, his death, and the price of love. My dearest Leo, the first letter began. I hope you can forgive an old man for the secrets he kept. I always believe that what a man does is more important than what he says, but I see now that my silence has cost you dearly. It has cost you your freedom, and for that, I will never be able to forgive myself. I need you to understand why I did what I did. It all started about 3 years ago, not long after you came to live with me for good. Business at the shop was slowing down. The town was changing. People weren't fixing things anymore. They were replacing them. I was getting older. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and the bills were piling up. That's when a man from Trinity Holdings first came to see me. My blood ran cold. Trinity Holdings, the same company that wanted to buy the land. He was a smooth talker, the letter continued. Dressed in a sharp suit, drove a fancy car. He said his company was interested in buying up land in the area for a new development. He made me an offer for our 5 acres. It was a good offer, a generous one, enough to pay off my debts and set us up comfortably for the rest of our lives. I was tempted, Leo. Lord knows I was. But something about him felt wrong. It was the way he looked at our home, not as a place where a family lived, but as a square on a map, an obstacle to be removed. I told him I wasn't interested. He smiled and said the offer would stand, and that he was sure I'd come around. He was right about one thing. He didn't give up. He came back a month later with a lower offer. I said no again. The next month, lower still. It became a kind of cruel ritual. I started getting notices from the county. Code violations for things that had never been a problem before. The fence being 6 inches too high. The workshop being too close to the property line. Fines started piling up. My taxes were reassessed at a ridiculously high rate. I was being squeezed, and I knew exactly who was doing the squeezing. I had to stop reading for a moment. My head was spinning. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a deliberate, calculated attack. I started asking around town, he wrote. Quietly, I found out Trinity Holdings had bought up half the county, mostly from people who were in financial trouble. They were ruthless, but I also heard whispers. That Trinity wasn't just a development company. It was a front, a way for a local crew, run by a man named Marcus Thorne, to launder money. Thorne was into everything. Loan sharking, chop shops, you name it. He was a cancer on this town, but he was smart. He kept his hands clean, operating through layers of corporations and lawyers. He wanted my land because it was the last piece he needed to control the entire waterfront access for his planned development. He wasn't going to take no for an answer. I knew I couldn't fight him head on. I was an old man with no money and a failing heart. And I had you to protect. That was the only thing that mattered. Protecting you. So I came up with a plan. A foolish, desperate plan. I started selling off my assets. Not the land, but everything else. My collection of antique tools, the classic motorcycle I'd spent 20 years restoring, my life insurance policy, I cashed it all out. I did it slowly through private sales for cash. I didn't put a dime in the bank. I knew Thorne's people had eyes everywhere. I started hiding the money here, in the one place I knew was truly mine. I built this compartment into the bench where you and I used to sit and talk for hours. And then I did the hardest part. I started letting the property go. I stopped paying the taxes. I stopped fixing the house. I let the lawn grow wild. I wanted the place to look worthless. I wanted it to look like the home of a broken old man who had given up. I thought if it looked like it was more trouble than it was worth, Thorne might lose interest or I could buy time. I was wrong. I could feel the tears welling in my eyes. The shame I'd carried, believing he'd let everything fall apart, that he'd given up on me, on our home. It was all a lie. It was an act of protection. It was a shield. This is the part that's going to be the hardest to read, Leo. This is about what happened to you. Thorne knew you were my weakness. You were the leverage he had over me. The car parts they found in the workshop, they were planted. It happened one night when you were out with your friends. I was in the house. I heard a noise, but my heart was acting up. I was slow to get to the door. By the time I got out there, I just saw a truck speeding away down the lane. The next day, the police were there with a warrant based on an anonymous tip. They went straight to the old shed. Of course, they found what they were looking for. I tried to tell them. I tried to explain that we were being set up. But I was just a crazy old man, deep in debt, my property a wreck. And you were a teenager. It was the perfect story for them. I saw the look in your lawyer's eyes. She believed you were innocent, but she knew she couldn't prove it. The evidence was too clean. Thorne's people were professionals. So when they offered the deal, I told you to take it. It was the worst moment of my life. I was telling my own grandson to plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit. I did it because I was terrified. I knew what Thorne was capable of. If you had fought it and gone to adult prison, he would have found a way to get to you. I was sure of it. This way, I knew you'd be in a juvenile facility. I knew you'd be safe, at least for a while. And I knew you'd have a release date. It was a countdown, a deadline for me to make things right. My plan was to use this money to hire a real investigator, a real lawyer, to expose Thorn before you got out. But my heart, it had other plans. I'm running out of time, son. I can feel it. That's why I'm writing this. The money in this box is yours. There's over $100,000 here. It's everything I had left in the world. It's your second chance. You have a choice to make. It's a choice I can't make for you. You can take this money, disappear, and start a new life somewhere far away from here. No one would blame you. You deserve that. Or you can stay and fight. You can use this money to do what I couldn't. To clear your name and to take back what belongs to us. Thorn and his company, Trinity Holdings, they still want this land. Their offer is an insult, but it's also their weakness. They are impatient. They're used to getting what they want. Use it against them. In the bag, there's an audio recorder. The last time a man from Trinity came to see me, I recorded our conversation. He got sloppy. He said things. He mentioned Thorn's name. It might not be enough for a conviction, but it's a start. It's a crack in the wall. Ms. Albright is a good woman. She's overworked, but her heart is in the right place. You could trust her. Show her this letter. Play her the recording. Let her help you. Whatever you choose, Leo, know this. I love you more than anything. Every single thing I did, right or wrong, I did it to protect you. I am so proud of the man you've become. Be strong. Be smart. Be better than me. Forgive me. Gramps. I let the letter fall into my lap. The world had been tilted on its axis. The story I had been telling myself for 2 years, a story of abandonment, failure, and shame, had been replaced by a story of incredible sacrifice, of a desperate, fierce love. My grandfather hadn't given up. He had gone to war for me, in the only way he knew how. He had made himself look weak to give me strength. He had sacrificed his reputation to protect my life. I wasn't the grandson of a failure. I was the grandson of a hero. I sat there for hours, in the freezing cold of the caboose, surrounded by his final gift. I cried. I cried for him, for the time we'd lost, for the fear and pain he must have gone through alone. I cried for myself, for the boy who went into that facility believing he was worthless. And I cried for the anger that was now burning in my chest, a clean, hot flame that burned away all the fear and confusion. He had given me a choice, run or fight, freedom or justice. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. Taking the money, buying a ticket to California or Oregon, finding a small town by the ocean, changing my name, and forgetting Leo Parker and Northwood ever existed. It was a beautiful dream, a life without a past. But it felt hollow. It felt like a betrayal. My grandfather hadn't given me this money to run. He'd given it to me as ammunition. He had laid the groundwork, and now it was my turn to finish the fight. Running would mean Thorn wins. It would mean my grandfather's sacrifice was for nothing. It would mean the lie they told about me would become the truth forever. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that? A moment where you have to choose between the person you are and the person you want to become? The easy path is right there, paved and well lit, promising comfort and an escape from pain. And then there's the other path. It's dark, it's overgrown, and you have no idea what's waiting for you down that road. But you know, deep in your bones, it's the only path that leads back to yourself. If you've ever faced that choice, or if you're facing it right now, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, this channel, it's for everyone who has chosen the harder road. Let me know in the comments if this is hitting home for you. Your story matters. And I promise you, I read every single one. Now, let's get back to what happened in that caboose. The decision, when it finally came, wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a slow dawn. As the first gray light of morning began to filter through the grimy windows of the train car, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going anywhere. This was my home. This land was soaked in my grandfather's love and sacrifice, and I would not let it be stolen by a man like Marcus Thorn. I found a small audio recorder. It was an old digital one, but it looked solid. I pressed the play button. A voice, slick and condescending, filled the small space. Come on, old man. Let's be reasonable. The offer is $5,000. That's my final. You take it, or the county takes the land anyway, and you get nothing. Then I heard my grandfather's voice, weak but stubborn. This land is not for sale. Everything is for sale. the man sneered. Listen, I'm trying to be nice here. Mr. Thorne is not a patient man. He wants this wrapped up. He gets what he wants. You really want to make an enemy of him? Over this pile of dirt? Think about your grandson. It would be a shame if he ran into more trouble. When he gets out, it was there. The threat. The connection. It was exactly what I needed. My hands were steady now. I packed the letters and the recorder back into the plastic bag. I took one bundle of cash, $5,000, and put in my jacket pocket. I hid the rest of the money back in the secret compartment, bolting the lid back on as tightly as I could. It was a slow, arduous process, but every turn of the wrench felt like an affirmation. A promise. I found an old canvas duffel bag in a corner and put a few of my grandfather's tools in it. A hammer, a pry bar, a good set of wrenches. Then I walked out of the caboose and into the morning light. The property didn't look like a tombstone anymore. It looked like a battlefield, and I was finally ready to fight. I walked the 2 miles into town. Northwood was just waking up. A few pickup trucks rumbled down the main street. The smell of coffee and bacon wafted from a small diner called the Whistle Stop. I went inside. The woman behind the counter gave me a curious look. I probably looked like a ghost, pale and thin in clothes that didn't fit. "Coffee, please," I said, my voice hoarse. I sat at the counter and used the $5,000 to buy a prepaid cell phone from the general store next door. The first call I made was to Ms. Albright. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional. "Albright, Ms. Albright, it's Leo Parker." There was a pause. "Now, are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm in Northwood. I'm at the property, and I'm not taking the deal." I could almost hear her sigh through the phone. "Leo, we talked about this. That money is a lifeline. Don't throw it away out of pride." "It's not pride," I said, my voice low and even. "It's evidence. My grandfather, he left me things. Letters. A recording. He explains everything. The frame-up, Trinity Holdings, a man named Marcus Thorne. He recorded one of their guys threatening him, threatening me. The line went completely silent. I could hear the faint buzz of her office in the background. After a long moment, she spoke, and her voice was completely different. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "Don't say another word over the phone. Don't talk to anyone. Are you safe right now?" "I think so. I'm in town, okay. I'm getting in my car. I'll be there in 4 hours. Find a public place, a library or a coffee shop, and wait for me. Do not go back to the property alone. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "Leo," she added, just before she hung up, "you might have just changed everything." The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in the corner of the town's tiny public library, pretending to read a magazine, my heart pounding a steady, nervous rhythm against my ribs. Every time the door opened, I flinched. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I had declared war, and I had no idea how powerful the enemy was. But when Ms. Albright walked in, a wave of relief washed over me. She looked different here, out of her cramped city office. She looked like a force of nature. We sat at a secluded table in the back. I laid it all out for her. I gave her the letters to read, and then I played her the recording. I watched her face as she listened, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock, and then to a slow-burning anger that matched my own. When it was over, she sat back, her eyes blazing. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the leverage we never had. The recording connects Trinity to Thorne, and the threat links them directly to your case. This is grounds to reopen your conviction. And it's the beginning of a case against Thorne." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Leo. He built you a fortress, and he armed you to the teeth. That day, everything changed. Ms. Albright took the evidence back to the city. She didn't just reopen my case. She took it to the district attorney's public integrity unit. The $100,000 my grandfather left me wasn't just a second chance. It was a war chest. We hired a private investigator, a retired cop who knew exactly how to dig into Thorne's crooked empire. We hired the best appellate lawyer in the state. The money allowed us to fight the system on its own terms. The first thing we did was formally reject Trinity Holdings' offer. Their lawyer called Ms. Albright, oozing false concern. She informed him that not only were we rejecting the offer, but we were filing a civil suit against them for harassment and conspiracy, and that we had new evidence pertaining to the conviction of Leo Parker. The phone call, she told me later, was very, very short. While the legal battle raged in the city, I stayed in Northwood. I couldn't stay in the Caboose forever, but I refused to leave the land. I used some of the money to buy a used pickup truck and supplies. I couldn't fix the main house. It was too far gone, but I could make the Caboose my own. I patched the roof. I installed a new wood-burning stove that kept the winter chill at bay. I ran a new electrical line from the workshop. I scrubbed the floors and walls until they were clean, and I put a fresh coat of bright red paint on the exterior. Slowly, painstakingly, the rusty old train car started to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. The town was small, and people talked. At first, they were wary of me. I was the delinquent grandson of the crazy old man who'd let his property fall to ruin. But they also hated Marcus Thorne. They knew he was strangling the town, but they were too scared to do anything about it. When they saw me, day after day, working on the land, not running, not selling, something shifted. The owner of the diner, a woman named Sarah whose family had been in Northwood for generations, started giving me free coffee. The man at the hardware store gave me a discount on lumber. They didn't say much, but their actions spoke volumes. They were rooting for me. One afternoon, an old man I recognized from the diner pulled up my lane. He introduced himself as Jim, a retired railroad engineer. "Heard you were living in the old Caboose," he said, chewing on a toothpick. "Your grandfather was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but good." He spent the rest of the afternoon telling me stories about my grandfather, stories I'd never heard. And he showed me how to properly service the Caboose's old brake assembly, just because he thought it ought to be done right. It was a small thing, but it felt huge. It felt like I was being welcomed back into the community, one small act of kindness at a time. I was no longer just an outsider. I was Parker's grandson. I belonged here. 6 months after that first phone call, I got the news. My conviction was vacated. The district attorney, armed with the evidence from our investigator, had opened a massive racketeering case against Marcus Thorne and his associates. The Trinity Holdings development was frozen, its assets seized. The whole corrupt enterprise was beginning to crumble, all because one old man refused to be broken. I was standing in the doorway of my caboose when Ms. Albright called to tell me. The sun was setting over the trees, and the light was golden. I was officially a free man. Not just out of the system, but cleared, innocent. My name was mine again. I hung up the phone and just stood there, breathing in the cool evening air. I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had reclaimed my life. I had honored my grandfather's sacrifice. I had stayed and I had fought. It's been 2 years since that day. The legal cases against Thorne are still ongoing, but his power over this town is broken. The land is officially mine, free and clear. I've started a small engine repair business in my grandfather's old workshop, just like him. It's not much, but it's honest work and it's mine. I never fixed the old house. I decided to let it go. Its story was over. My story, my home, is the Caboose. It's small, but it's solid. It's a constant reminder that the most valuable things we inherit aren't land or money. They're stories. They are sacrifices. They're the choices we make when everything seems lost. My grandfather left me more than $100,000. He left me a road map back to myself. He taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build, a place you fight for. It's the ground you refuse to surrender. He gave me back my future, a future he'd hidden under a bench in a rusty old train car, waiting for me to be ready to claim it. So what did this story teach you? For me, it was about reframing the narrative. I thought I was abandoned, but I was being protected. I thought my inheritance was a pile of debt, but it was a treasure of truth. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about our own lives are the most dangerous prisons of all, and breaking out of them is the only way to truly be free. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. If my story or my grandfather's story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This is more than just a place for stories. It's a community for people who understand that the deepest scars often lead to the greatest strength. Share your own story in the comments below. What have you fought for? What inheritance of truth has changed your life? I'll be down there reading and responding, because every story of survival is a light in the dark, and we need all the light we can get. Thank you for listening.